In the distant future, humanity had risen to become a dominant force in the galaxy. Though still a relatively young species in the vastness of the cosmos, Earth's people had conquered many worlds, developed incredible technologies, and built vast intergalactic alliances. Among their many encounters, one stood out: a brutal war with the Varkari, an alien race known for their ruthless warriors and their technologically advanced fleets. The war had lasted for decades, with humans struggling to repel the Varkari forces from their colonies and territories. The Varkari had once been allies of humanity, but that had changed when the Varkari king, Orvak, had decided to wage war for reasons unknown, even to his own people. His reign was marked by bloodshed, conquest, and a thirst for power that spread across the galaxy. He viewed all other species as weak, except for the Varkari themselves, who had risen to the top of the galactic hierarchy. But there was one being Orvak valued above all others: his daughter, Queen Thalira. She was a brilliant strategist, a powerful leader, and the heart of the Varkari Empire. It was said that she alone possessed the wisdom to guide the Varkari through the chaos of their conquest. However, despite her power, Thalira was deeply bound by the traditions and customs of her people, which demanded that she rule through strength, not compassion. In the final days of the war, Thalira's ship was ambushed by a rogue faction of humanity, acting outside of official channels. In a brutal attack, the Varkari vessel was destroyed, and Thalira was left stranded on a primitive planet, Earth. Her ship, disabled and her escape pod damaged, crash-landed in the dense forests of the planet, leaving the Queen with little hope of survival. On Earth, a young man named Elias was living a quiet, secluded life. He was the son of a former soldier, a man who had fought in the early days of the war with the Varkari. But Elias had never truly believed in the conflict. His father's death in battle left him with a deep resentment for the senseless violence that had torn apart families, both human and alien. Elias spent his days working the land, far from the wars and conflicts that raged across the stars. One day, while exploring the forest near his small cabin, Elias stumbled upon the wreckage of an alien craft. His heart raced as he realized what it was. He had heard stories of the Varkari, of their warriors and their kings, but he had never expected to encounter one of their kind so far from the front lines. As he cautiously approached the wreckage, he discovered a faint pulse emanating from inside. Moving quickly, he managed to pry open the hatch and pull out the unconscious form of an alien. To his shock, it wasn't a soldier or warrior. It was the Queen herself, Queen Thalira. Her breathing was shallow, and her pale skin was marked by bruises and cuts. Elias's mind raced. He had heard of the Varkari's cruelty, their unforgiving nature. He knew the stories, the way they destroyed planets, razed cities, and crushed anyone who stood in their way. But as he looked down at her unconscious form, he couldn't bring himself to view her as a monster. There was something about her, something human in the way she looked, so fragile, so vulnerable. Without hesitation, Elias carried Thalira back to his cabin, tending to her injuries and trying to nurse her back to health. Over the next several days, he kept her hidden from the authorities, terrified that if anyone discovered the alien queen on Earth, she would be hunted down and humanity would find itself in the middle of yet another intergalactic war. But during this time, Elias and Thalira began to communicate. Though her language was foreign, she managed to convey her thoughts through gestures, a few broken words, and the shared experience of healing. As Thalira regained strength, she began to open up to Elias. She spoke of her people, her struggles, and her father, King Orvak. She explained how she had been raised to rule through fear, how her people demanded nothing less than perfection from their leaders. Thalira had never wanted war, but she had been bound by the legacy of her father. She confessed that she had never believed in the bloodshed, but had been forced into the role of warrior and queen. Yet Elias, a simple, untrained human, was the one who had saved her, an act of compassion that no one else had shown her in her life. As Elias listened to her, he found himself questioning everything he had been taught. His father had taught him to hate the Varkari, to see them as nothing more than conquerors. But in Thalira, he saw a different side of the Varkari, a side he had never been allowed to see. She was not a monster, not a villain, but a person caught in a vicious cycle of duty and fear. But as the days passed, Thalira's presence on Earth became increasingly dangerous. The Varkari were relentless in their search for their queen, and King Orvak, who had already lost so much in the war, was not going to let his daughter fall into the hands of an inferior species. He launched an all-out search for her, sending fleets across the galaxy to locate and retrieve her. His spies on Earth had already identified the location of her crash site, and it was only a matter of time before they found her. Elias knew he couldn't keep her hidden forever. The Varkari king would not stop until he had his daughter back, and the consequences for humans harboring a Varkari princess would be dire. But Elias, now deeply invested in her survival, was unwilling to let Thalira fall back into the hands of her tyrannical father. He had come to care for her, more than he had ever thought possible, and he realized that he had to do whatever it took to protect her. The night before the Varkari fleet was set to arrive, Elias made his decision. He would take Thalira to the nearest spaceport and send her off into the galaxy, away from the violence, away from her father. He knew it would be dangerous, but he had no other choice. As they made their way to the spaceport, Elias and Thalira were confronted by a group of Varkari soldiers. The queen's identity had been confirmed, and the soldiers had orders to take her back, by force if necessary. But as they surrounded Elias and Thalira, something unexpected happened. Thalira, now fully recovered, stood tall and defiant, no longer the fragile creature she had once been. With a voice that resonated with authority, she addressed the soldiers. "Leave us," she commanded. The soldiers hesitated, their loyalty to their king conflicting with their respect for their queen. But then Thalira took a step forward and revealed the truth. She would no longer be bound by the tyranny of her father. She had come to understand the value of compassion, of mercy, and she would not return to a life of war. The soldiers, caught between their orders and their queen's command, looked to Elias for guidance. In that moment, Elias did something that stunned both Thalira and the Varkari. He stepped forward, raising his hand in a gesture of peace, and declared that Earth would protect their queen. A human, an ordinary, primitive human, had made the ultimate sacrifice. He had risked everything, even his own life, to save the life of an alien princess. For the first time in his life, King Orvak was left in shock. His daughter had defied him, had chosen to live her life on her own terms, and had even found sanctuary with the very species he had sworn to dominate. His empire, built on fear and bloodshed, had been undone by the compassion of a human. Thalira left with Elias, leaving the past behind. In her eyes, there was a glimmer of hope for herself, for humanity, and for the future of the galaxy. And as they looked up to the stars, they knew that the universe had changed forever. The queen had been saved, and a new chapter of peace had begun, one written not in the blood of war, but in the kindness and courage of those who dared to make a difference.